It is August 10th, 1628. The city of Stockholm is holding its breath. For the last 2 years, the royal dockyards had been a hive of frantic, loud, and expensive activity. The air smells of fresh pine, hot tar, and the sweat of 400 carpenters. Today, the result of that labor is finally touching the water. This is the Vasa. She is unlike anything the world has ever seen. Standing over 50 meters tall, adorned with over 700 hand-carved, brightly painted sculptures of lions, biblical heroes, and Roman emperors. But her beauty is just a mask. Hidden behind her hull are 64 massive bronze cannons, ready to rain fire on any enemy of the Swedish Empire. As the ship is slowly towed from the quay near the royal palace, the crowd, nearly 10,000 people, begins to roar. The king isn't there, he's away on the front lines of a war in Poland, but his ego is present in every inch of this vessel. The sails are unfurled, the wind catches them, the Vasa begins to move under her own power. A ceremonial salute is fired, smoke filling the air. It's the proudest moment in Swedish history. And it's about to become its greatest disaster. Barely 20 minutes into the voyage, a light breeze, not a storm, just a gust, hits the ship. The Vasa heels to the side. The crowd gasps. She rights herself briefly, but then comes a second gust. This time, she tilts further. The open gun ports, positioned just 3 feet above the waterline for the ceremonial salute, begin to swallow the Baltic Sea. In front of thousands of horrified witnesses, the invincible flagship disappeared. In less than 30 minutes, Sweden's naval dreams have sunk to the bottom of the harbor. But why did this happen? How did the greatest engineers of the era build a ship that couldn't even survive a breeze? And how did this $500 million embarrassment become the greatest archaeological treasure in history? To understand the Vasa, you have to understand the man who ordered it, King Gustavus Adolphus. In the early 17th century, Sweden was a rising power, but it was surrounded by enemies. The king, known as the Lion of the North, was a brilliant but demanding leader. He didn't just want a navy, he wanted a statement. At the time, the Swedish Navy was losing ships to storms and battles. The king decided he needed 4 new ships, with the Vasa being the jewel in the crown. He signed a contract with a Dutch master shipbuilder named Henrik Hubris. But here is where the trouble began. Hubris was an expert, but he was used to building smaller, single-deck ships. The king, however, had been hearing rumors about the Danish Navy building ships with 2 full decks of cannons. He couldn't be outdone. In the middle of construction, he sent an order to the shipyard. The Vasa must have 2 gun decks. Now, you have to realize that in 1626, there were no blueprints or complex physics simulations. Shipbuilders worked by feel and traditional proportions. By doubling the armament, they were adding massive weight. Bronze cannons weighed nearly 2 tons each to the top half of the ship. Hubris was in a nightmare. If he refused the king, he was a traitor. If he followed the orders, he was breaking the laws of physics. To make matters worse, Hubris fell ill and died halfway through the project, leaving his inexperienced assistant to finish the most complex engineering project in Swedish history. As the ship neared completion, it was clear that the Vasa was top-heavy. She was narrow, tall, and packed with heavy bronze on her upper decks. Before the ship set sail, the vice admiral, Class Fleming, decided to conduct a stability test. He gathered 30 sailors on the main deck and told them to run, all at once, from the left side of the ship to the right. Think about that for a second. This was the 1628 version of a stress test. On the first pass, the ship rocked. On the second pass, she tilted dangerously. On the third pass, the Vasa rocked so violently that the admiral ordered them to stop. He realized that if they kept running, the ship would capsize right there at the dock. Now, a logical person would have stopped the launch. They would have added more ballast, heavy stones, at the bottom of the ship. But there was no room for more ballast because the king had demanded the ship be built with such a low profile. The admiral had a choice: tell the king his expensive toy was a death trap, or let it sail and hope for the best. Fearing the king's temper more than the ocean's depth, he gave the order to sail. When the Vasa sank, the shock was total. The king was furious. He demanded someone be punished. An inquest was held, but they couldn't find a scapegoat. The builder was dead, the admiral had followed orders, and you couldn't exactly put the king on trial. The case was eventually dropped, and the Vasa was left to rot. Or so they thought. In most of the world's oceans, a wooden shipwreck is a buffet for shipworms, mollusks that can eat a massive vessel until nothing remains but the metal. But the Baltic Sea is a biological anomaly. Its water is cold, and most importantly, it has very low salinity. Shipworms cannot survive there. The Vasa didn't rot. She was slowly covered by a layer of protective mud, resting in a cold, oxygen-free tomb. Fast forward to the 1950s, while the rest of the world was looking at space, a man named Anders Franzén was looking at the bottom of Stockholm harbor. He was an amateur maritime archaeologist with a theory: if the Baltic was shipworm-free, the Vasa might still be there. For years, people laughed at him. He dragged a grappling iron across the seabed for summers on end, finding old bicycles, stoves, and trash. But in 1956, near the island of Beckholmen, his coring tool pulled up something strange: a piece of blackened oak. He had found her. And she wasn't just a pile of wood. She was standing upright, almost perfectly preserved, as if she were waiting to be woken. Finding the ship was the easy part. Raising it was an engineering challenge that would cost millions and take years. Divers had to go down into the pitch-black, freezing water. They had to use high-pressure water jets to tunnel underneath the ship to pass massive steel cables through. Imagine being a diver, squeezed into a tiny tunnel under a 1,200-ton ship that could shift and crush you at any second. Finally, on April 24, 1961, the moment of truth arrived. Huge pontoons pumped out water, and slowly, the Vasa broke the surface for the first time in 338 years. The sight was ghostly. The wood was perfectly intact. You could still see the carvings on the hull. But the moment the ship hit the air, a new race against time began. If the wood dried out, it would warp, crack, and turn to dust. The water inside the wood cells had to be replaced with something that wouldn't evaporate. For the next 17 years, the ship was sprayed 24 hours a day with a chemical called polyethylene glycol, a waxy substance that slowly penetrated the timber. It was a painstaking, expensive, and messy process, but it worked. Today, the Vasa sits in her own custom-built museum in Stockholm. She is the most visited museum in Scandinavia, for good reason. When you stand next to her, she feels like a living thing. You can see the tools the sailors left behind, the shoes they wore, and even the coins in their pockets. Archaeologists recovered over 40,000 items from the ship. These artifacts have taught us more about 17th century life than almost any book ever could. But beyond the history and the science, the Vasa remains a monument to a very human failing: hubris. It is the story of what happens when the person with the most power in the room is also the person with the least technical knowledge. The king wanted a symbol of his greatness, but because he ignored the experts and the laws of nature, he created a symbol of his failure. The Vasa was built to be a weapon of war. Instead, she became a time capsule. She was meant to conquer the seas. Instead, she conquered time. Today, she's valued at over $500 million, not as a warship, but as a reminder that no matter how much gold you use or how many lions you carve into the wood, you can never, ever defeat the laws of physics. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most expensive mistake, hit the like button and let me know in the comments, what's a modern-day Vasa that you've seen? a project that was all ego and no substance. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of the incredible, the tragic, and the bizarre. Thanks for watching.